Chapter 2. You don't have to understand. In Genesis, the first book of the Bible, we are introduced to Jacob. In 1 week, he married 2 sisters. If that sounds like a bad idea, it's only because it was. He was tricked into being the husband of sister wives, and at his wives' urging, he slept with and had children with 2 more women. Jacob did what so many of us do when things are spinning out of control. More of the same. If sleeping with 2 women wasn't working, maybe sleeping with 4 would make the situation less turbulent and volatile. It didn't. In fact, the jealousy of the moms and striving for Jacob's love and favor trickled into the lives of the children. Joseph was the long-awaited son of Jacob's favored wife, Rachel. Jacob loved Rachel, so Jacob loved Joseph. We're told. Now Israel, Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Genesis 37, verses 33 and 4. Joseph was 17 years old at the time, which means his brothers' ages probably ranged from early 20s to early 30s. It also meant they had 17 years to watch their father pamper Joseph, gush over Joseph, and treat Joseph like a big deal, even though Jacob already had 10 other sons. Joseph's brothers' jealousy manifested itself in intense hatred. They hated Joseph enough to kill him, and when the opportunity arose and they saw him walking towards them alone, that was their plan. As they plotted a too-good-to-be-true, lucrative opportunity presented itself. Merchants on their way to Egypt just happened to be going by, and despite Joseph's pleading, they happily took 20 shekels of silver to get rid of their father's pride and joy. Don't read that like it doesn't matter. They hated Joseph enough to sell him. They didn't care if he lived or died as long as they didn't have to see their father gush over him for one more day. Later, the brothers recalled that day, saying, "We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen." Genesis 42, verse 21. The people Joseph thought he could trust and thought had his back didn't. Those closest to Joseph did him the most harm. Joseph's brothers were traumatized by their father's lack of love, and in response, traumatized their brother by refusing to love him. Does that sound familiar? Have you been there, either as the one with scars who ferociously destroys others, or perhaps as the object of someone's wrath? With little warning or explanation, someone put the target on you and continually pounced on you because you had a smile on your face, the joy of the Lord in your heart, or just because you were an easy target. Hurting others doesn't take away the hurt. It multiplies it. You still hurt, and now you're hurting someone else by doing the very thing you hated when it was done to you. Hurt people don't have to hurt people. They can deal with the hurt. They can stop the cycle, ask for forgiveness, and get help. They can find people to hold them accountable. Whether you've been the one subconsciously hurting others or the one on the receiving end of a hurt person's wrath, don't let the scars destroy you. You were easy prey. You got in their way. Pray that God heals them and heals you from the hurt they inflicted, but don't let the hurt devour you. With God's help and the strength he provides, do what Joseph did and carry on. Bring people to the feet of Jesus as the healer of all pain and the one who carried the pain our sins inflicted on him. Pray never to lose the joy of the Lord. And forgive with Christ-like forgiveness. You don't have to put yourself back on the path of the ones who hurt you, but you can pray for their well-being. Jesus prayed for his tormentors. Luke 23, verse 34. By God's grace and through the power of the Spirit, we can do the same. If Joseph's story ended there, it would be tragic enough. But it didn't. When Joseph arrived in Egypt, he was sold to Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guard. Here we see God at work in much the same way he was with Job. God allowed pain into Job's life, but God also controlled the extent of the pain. Like Job, Joseph lost everything. In one day, he lost his home, his family, and his identity. Like Job, Joseph went from a place of favor to destitution in a matter of hours. Job still had his wife and his homeland. Joseph was taken to a new land to learn a new language and a new way of life. But Joseph didn't go alone. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. Genesis 39, verse 2. God is with us in our times of suffering too. Before you guffaw, cringe, or put down this book, let me prove that to be true. God allowed Job and Joseph to suffer, but not on their own. God's attentive eyes were on Joseph and Job. We're told as much with Joseph. And though we aren't given such a blatant statement in Job's case, when Satan presented himself to God a second time, God held Job up as maintaining his integrity despite all Satan had done to him. Job 2, verse 3. God saw. He paid attention to Job's response. God's attentive eyes are on us too. Isaiah 49, verses 15 and 16 assures us, can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she has born? Though she may forget, I will not forget you. See, I've engraved you on the palms of my hands. Your walls are ever before me. Those of us who grew up without phones may remember a time when we wrote things we didn't want to forget on our hands. Many, many days, I scribbled a quick reminder, not on my palm, but on my wrist, where it'd be easy to see and just as easy to scrub off. You can't forget something written on your hand because you use your hands so much. God doesn't just write our names on his hands. He engraves us there. Our walls, issues are always before him. If Joseph's story ended there, it might be a happy ending. Joseph was sold, lost his family, but went to work for an Egyptian master who respected him and put him in charge of everything he had. It was certainly not ideal, but a win nonetheless. Potiphar's household experienced enormous blessings thanks to Joseph, and Joseph was put in charge of everything and presumably had a fulfilling role. But that's not the end of the story. Joseph was, quote, well-built and handsome, unquote. And those aren't words God throws around. On a scale of 1 to 10, Joseph was a 15. Potiphar's wife took notice of Joseph, Genesis 39, 6 and 7, and couldn't get him out of her mind. Day after day after day after day, she tried to get Joseph into her bed. And day after day after day, Joseph did what was right in God's eyes and avoided her. See Genesis 39, verses 8 and 9. But one day, Potiphar's wife amped up her game. He went to the house to do his household duties and noticed none of the servants were around. It was just Potiphar's wife and him. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. Genesis 39, verse 12. And instead of a pat on the back and cheers for doing the right thing, Potiphar's wife accused him of trying to rape her. Once again, Joseph fell. This time from head of Potiphar's household to inmate in Pharaoh's prison. Some of us have been there. We stand up for what is right only to be hated, to have people twist our intentions and make us out to be the problem. Jesus told us to expect as much. If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. John 15, verses 18 and 19. I can read that 1,000 times and still get caught off guard when it happens. Joseph obeyed God and his actions had life-changing ramifications. He lost his job and once again, his way of life. We're told, but while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all he had in the prison, all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Genesis 39, verses 20 to 23. God didn't want Joseph serving Potiphar for the rest of his life. He had a much bigger assignment for him, and putting Joseph in that prison was one step closer to where he wanted him to be. That's hard for us to comprehend. In our minds, raising up a person should be linear and upward. But God doesn't always move in our time, our way, or our direction. In 1 Corinthians 2:16, the Apostle Paul asks, "Who has known the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him?" Not you and not me. God works in ways that we can't comprehend. God told Isaiah, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Isaiah 55, verses 8 and 9. It's probably a good thing we can't comprehend what God is doing. If we understood God's way all the time, we would be like God and would need God. As it is, we don't understand his ways, so we learn to trust, even when we don't comprehend. It's what the Apostle Paul referred to as walking by faith, not by sight. 2 Corinthians 5, verses 5 through 8. If that sounds hard to do, it's because it is. When Satan appeared before God and God presented Job as an example of righteousness, Satan accused Job of following God because of the blessings God had bestowed on him. God allowed the blessings to disappear. When Satan returned from destroying Job's life, Satan said if Job himself was afflicted, he'd curse God to his face. Job 2, verse 5. So God allowed it. When Job and Joseph were stripped of their blessings and knocked down again, they didn't curse God. Job and Joseph clung to their integrity even when it brought retaliation. For Joseph, it was prison. For Job, it was friends who accused him of doing something to deserve the situation he was in. That doesn't mean Job and Joseph weren't frustrated or confused by their situations. Joseph interpreted the dreams of two men while in prison. One, a baker, would be put to death. The other, Pharaoh's cupbearer, would be restored to his position. Joseph told the cupbearer, "But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon." Genesis 40, verses 14 and 15. In Job 7, 17 through 20, we get a sense of Job's frustration. "What is mankind that you make so much of them, that you give them so much attention, that you examine them every moment and test them every moment? Will you never look away from me or leave me alone even for an instant? If I have sinned, what have I done to you? You who see everything we do, why have you made me your target? Have I become a burden to you?" Job accused God of being too watchful and punishing him for every little thing he did wrong. When things go from bad to worse, and sometimes even worse still, it's normal for us to feel the same. Why, God? Why now? Why me? Why her? Why him? When will this end? It's normal for our sinful nature to want answers, and it's normal to go to the one who holds the answers. But blaming God or falling into despair isn't a good place to stay. Joseph was in prison for 2 years. Job endured an immensely painful season. But reading their accounts in the Bible reminds us that God was in the story. He was not aloof, and he certainly wasn't enjoying their torment from afar. He was examining their hearts. In Joseph's case, God was moving him into position to rescue that part of the world and even his family from an ensuing famine. It would take years for Joseph to understand it all. But when he and his brothers were all together again, he would say with confidence, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Genesis 50, verse 20. Job, too, came to a point of recognizing that God was in it all, and he didn't have to understand. He just had to remember who God was. He said, "I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. You asked, 'Who is this that obscures my plans without knowledge?' Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. You said, 'Listen now, and I will speak. I will question you, and you shall answer me.' My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes." Job 42, verses 2 through 6. It's okay if you don't understand the particulars of your situation, as long as you understand that God does. He sees you and loves you. His timing may not coincide with yours, but he hasn't forgotten. He has a plan to bless you and help you either here on earth or by taking you to be with him in heaven forever. Trust God even in the depths, so when you get to the other side, you can rejoice that you persevered. Don't give Satan any chance to use you or your actions as fodder against God or as a means of saying, "I told you they wouldn't trust you if life got hard."